And if the other panelists could make their way up for our next session on what's next. Anil pointed out some of the major change points that he sees in India and China going forward, and some of the ramifications for trade and shipping and oil and gas. And of course, Espen, you also pointed out several things. I want to start by asking all the panelists where their greatest geopolitical concerns lie in terms of how it could impact your business. And I want to hone in just a little more on what both you, Espen, and Neil had to say, all right? Because you talked about the Middle East, you talked about Asia, for instance, you talked about India. What you didn't talk about, although you referenced it somewhat, was what could be the major choke points for shipping being impacted if there was a conflict to break out. It's one thing to have tensions, it's another thing to have a conflict. Very quickly, yeah.
Well, immediately I would say that, remember that Yemen is now breaking up and there's a shooting war going on there, which has to do with this competition between Gulf states and Iran. Yemen is adjacent to Somalia, and that's where you go through to go into the Bay of Aden, so that can become worse. That's immediate. The South China Sea issue is more important, I would say, but not as acute right now when it comes to becoming a choke point.
How likely is it that it could become acute? Is it that China is just being bellicose and getting more territorial? You alluded to the conference you were just at. Or do you think that this won't become a reality?
I think there are steps being taken from all sides to try to avoid that, because it's not really, while the countries are competing, they don't really want to stop trade because they live of trade. So I think investments are being made to cool down the climate, even if it's a real competition going on. But we know from history that bad things have happened without states actually wanting it. The First World War was not wanted by anybody. It still killed millions of people. So be aware of that drama, because it's a quite important one in global politics.
And Neil, if you had to choose one thing that could impact the shipping industry more than anything else in terms of the conflicts that are now going on or a potential strait that could be blocked, what is it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm particularly concerned about the heating up that's taking place in South China Sea. In fact, as Espen said quite rightly, is that the rhetoric at the Shangri-La dialogue was milder than last year. But if you look at the at the outside of the Shangri-La dialogue, if you look at what Ashton Carter, the US Secretary of Defense, said before the Shangri-La dialogue, and of course the US spy plane, and so I see the South China Sea situation becoming more risky, and neither side shows any sign of backing down, which means that a conflict could take place.
Yeah. So let me get this straight. In addition to all the things you outlined, what Sturla said this morning, and the industry that the shipping industry is in right now, still kind of trying to recover from the financial crisis, then, of course, the collapse of oil prices hitting the offshore industry hard, we have these tensions that are bubbling up, be it in Asia, the Middle East, of course, in the Ukraine. I want to go around and ask each of you, Leon and Ingvild and Angelique, Arnaud and Hans, where is your number one concern? What keeps you up at night in terms of your shipping fleet? Yeah.
Whenever you have geopolitical conflicts, the price of oil goes up. And if the price goes up substantially, then people are going to want to buy more oil and they're going to want to fill their strategic reserves. So if that happens, of course, the cost of shipping is going to rise. And it might be positive both for the offshore industry, because it's going to become more profitable to extract oil. And it's going to be positive for the tanker industry, because contango might form and people will want to store more oil. So unfortunately, whenever you have a conflict, it's positive for shipping overall.
Angelica.
Sorry, but I have to say that even today's market that is very low in oil is $60, VLCCs have the top earnings. So the reality is, I will agree that geopolitical risks are important, and as a European, I'll say the Russian issue is important. More than the Somalia or Yemen, because at the end of the story, piracy has a cost, and it has already incorporated in our industry. There is a toll that we all pay, and that is part of our reality. But, and really, Russia, the problem in Russia is really repricing of oil. From 110 to 50, 60, and that is a cost where oil for Russia needs to be over 100. But it can also have positive effects. Take a look on what happened with Cuba. I mean, really, the expensive oil created new venues, and the United States is opening up. Also, Iran may be or may not be an important new issue as we go forward.
It's good to know there are at least 2 Greeks who are optimistic. Okay, yeah. Ingvild, yeah.
Geopolitics will, of course, always have an impact on shipping. I'd like to come back to China again, because we see them designing kind of new global architecture. And they're aiming to kind of take back the control of the Asia Pacific. And we see the consequences of that already with what you talked about. We've seen, coming to your point about VLCCs, they are securing themselves access, bypassing the Malacca Strait, which is a choking point for them, bringing crude oil through Myanmar. So they're using the sea to go to take oil into China, bypassing Malacca Strait. That's something that has a huge impact. They are investing in Brazil, talking about building a railway across Brazil to Peru, creating a shorter distance to China. That's going to impact us a lot, of course.
So many roads lead to China, or no? Yeah.
Yes, I'm not a shipping company, but I'm a shipbuilder.
Yes.
Mainly focusing on relatively small vessels, and obviously the low oil price is hitting the European shipbuilding the most. And not only of the demand of the offshore vessels is decreasing to almost nothing, but also the governments of oil companies, oil countries like Nigeria, Venezuela, etc. They see a lot of cuts in their budgets, and they stop also buying petrol craft and also governmental vessels. That's all the price it for me.
Hans, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think geopolitical events can have positive and negative effects. If you look at some of the positive, take the closure of the Suez Canal, for example, in 1967, that spurred a lot of activity for shipping. And right now, I think the key event is obviously what's happening in Russia and in Ukraine, which will probably lead to some sort of diversification in terms of European gas supplies. Yeah. And that would ultimately benefit the LNG sector. But I would also like to say that, that China is kind of key for shipping. If we look at how the boom from 2004 to 2008 was fueled by China, and looking at China now transitioning its economy from a more investment-driven to a more consumption-driven economy, I think that's going to be key.